All right, we're back. Welcome back from the break. And so this is our final feature presentation. And then we'll move into some other activities. Again, we're going to be having a speed networking event, which requires a check-in. It'll be at the Princessa to the left, which is where we'll also have lunch at 12:45. So it's a good opportunity to meet a lot of people in a short amount of time, and we'll have some random table prizes that we'll hand out. So if you're interested in that, check that out, and then we'll be serving lunch after that, buffet style, and then you'll also be eating in the Princessa room with table topics. And I did want to mention, just to clarify, I'm getting all of the slides and handouts from the presenters after their presentations. I'm going to put it all together, and then right after the conference, like the day after, I'm going to put that all into a package, and everybody will get a distribution of all the slides. But those aren't available online right now. I'm still getting those from the presenters. But you'll get a complete set from me or a link to it via email. I also want to mention that Len Peralta, who again has been sketching away here, we're going to show some of his work after the lunch period, but you can see his work live through Google Plus by going to his Twitter at Len Peralta, and you can watch him working away on his Cintiq tablet with his interpretations. But let's jump right into this next session. And I'm a car guy. I love automobiles, and so I'm really keen to have this speaker here. I go and I check out the latest cars only to check out their phone integration and things like that. So all the dealers in the area know me and hate me because I never actually buy the cars, but I take them for test drives just to try out the UX stuff. But anyway, this presenter has come from Dearborn, Michigan, from the Ford Motor Company, where he heads up the UX group there. And let's please welcome Parrish Hanna.
Thanks, Joe. Can you guys hear me? All right, we're going to test all our audio capabilities. It's great to be here. I consider myself to be one of you guys, and have been in this space for 20 plus years, and we'll talk about that briefly. What's interesting, and I want to give you an overview and a snapshot of, is really just why your car is the way it is, and kind of where the state of the industry is, where it's going, some of the things we think about. It's interesting to follow Eric and Sean, and I will reserve the right to reference them multiple times as we go, just to kind of continue the conversation and the thread here. But you know, I thought I'd just include a few slides just about me and my background. I actually started in industrial product design, graphic design, and went on into anthropology and psychology and human learning and advertising. And through my career, you know, I've tried to span the world of user experience and design, you know, with a heavy focus on consumer empathy, really high quality of design, strong degree of intelligence in, you know, products and services and so forth. I've been in Chicago for 18 years, and then 3 years ago joined Ford Motor Company, and have tried to kind of change the company into what I think a lot of you guys practice and believe and, you know, find to be your calling, right? Particularly around user-driven design, a lot of the topics that have been talked about today. This is what I was doing before joining the automotive industry. And the interesting thing now, too, is that I think in my career, the evolution of PCs and ATMs and the web and digital strategy across multiple channels, you know, into product design, we're now in a space where the physical and the digital is very seamless, right? And to Joe talking about test driving cars and seeing how phone integrates and things like that, that's become more and more important, right? I think 47% of people seriously consider phone integration and app integration in there as a top factor to their car purchases. So working on operating systems, heavy in the Android world, building the first phones, tablets, and other wearables for a long time. And now I get to do kind of entire systems like this. So my team designs the interior interactive experiences of all the physical and digital components of all Ford Lincoln vehicles. So if you own a Fiesta, a Focus, a Fusion, this is the Lincoln MKZ. There's a strong push to bring Lincoln back as an American luxury brand and so forth, but everything that you see and touch and feel and even think about this vehicle, which is interesting. This is another example. This is a Focus, I think, that's coming out this year. And then we also do trucks. So the interesting thing, too, about working in an industrial company, in what I think is the tech space, this industrial company is now a database company. We're an analytics company. We're very much a software company. We're quickly becoming an intelligent system, algorithm design company. We're quickly becoming a cloud-based company, and making sense of all that, right? Again, through the manifestation of a product that can, travel at high speed and cause a lot of damage, but also be quite rewarding. One interesting thing that I'll mention about just this image and kind of where things are, as a society, I think we're addicted to being busy, right? I usually show a schedule that's divided into 30-minute increments. How many of us have a meeting every 30 minutes, right? It's ridiculous. We're also addicted to screens, right, and displays. And this is pretty typical, right? I think this is a Korean taxi driver. But to count 7, 8 vehicle or screens in a car is pretty typical. I think the number today is around 73% of us drive with our phone on our lap facing up, right? The rest of us put it in a glove compartment, or not in glove, 1% put it out of the way, so maybe in a glove compartment, and the rest put it in the cup holder if you're like me and it faces you, right? Lots of head nodding, okay. We're that other 30-some%. But the majority of folks put it on their lap. So what's interesting to me and why I took this job was a couple of interesting pieces. I mean, one was just understanding the functionality of the vehicle as it is today, and really sitting people in their car and asking what their car does. And this was even just as a consideration of going into the industry. Again, you guys know the 80-20 rule and how much of the functionality is actually used and how much do people really understand about what their car can do. On average, it's about 40%, right? So what they think the car can do and what it can actually do. The other interesting piece was, we now have a 4G connection. We have Wi-Fi capability. You can hook it to your, there's modems in many vehicles and many more coming. The cars are starting to talk to each other. So and then you have phone plugins, right? So if you've seen CarPlay from Apple or Google Automotive Link from Google and so forth, as well as things that Ford delivers like app integration and software development kits and APIs just to integrate with the vehicle. So endless content, endless applications, endless functionality, and again, you're driving. So that's the critical piece. We talk about the mission just of our team and blending, clarity of use, keeping things simple, right? In some of these spaces, and particularly here, I think in the future of the automobile, is what you choose not to put in is more important than what you choose to put in, right? Eric mentioned, wow, we're all worked up about the features. And this is one of those industries where there's an unlimited breadth of features, especially as we move towards semi-autonomous and autonomous vehicles and everything talking together and networked to cities and so forth. But just, again, at the heart of it, reflecting the ever-evolving needs of drivers and passengers, because we're humans, our behavior doesn't change so much, but all these things are coming at us, and what do we really understand and not understand? And then what level of learning do we go to and all those things. So also, so we keep it simple about clarity, simplicity, being modern, and somewhat being unique, because we have to establish a brand, and we have to create a design language and so forth, right? But most importantly, kind of prioritizing safety and comfort, entertainment, and those kind of things. So a lot of bad habits. This is a handful of vehicles from the auto show last year. I walk around and I take pictures. My favorite button this year is H2O. It's next to your driveway. I didn't hear your steering wheel. I didn't put it up. Anybody know what LDWS is? Warning system. Okay. heavy tech crowd good? Or Mercedes drivers, because I think every Mercedes might have that still these days. Good response, okay. So, T1, T2, these are pretty prevalent, and I thought to myself, holy cow, what industry still puts its acronyms into the vehicle for the user to understand, right? And it's a bit of a pervasive problem. The Model T was a little hard to crank up, but it was pretty simple in functionality. The interesting thing is the industry just keeps adding more features. And they add more features. And they add more features. And I could keep going, right? This is pretty significant. And when we ask people what they think is going on here, it's like, okay, this is an indicator for your wiper fluid level, right? Or, hey, I just shopped at Target, I'm on my way home. Or, hey, XXX gas. It says adult only gas, sorry, it's cropped. But these little icons and symbol systems, are just so absolutely critical to everything you see. And, in this case, hundreds of millions of cars in North America have this icon. So a lot of you guys might see it in what we call our cluster popping up, and you're not sure what it means, right? But your tire pressure is low, or something's wrong with the tread of your tire. And this results in 40,000 deaths a year because maybe people don't really understand what this means, right? So this is something personally I think I can fix, and my team can fix, right? So using the methods and practices that each of us know, around good design and feedback and testing and aided testing, online testing, in-context testing, and so forth. One by one, we're going to just fix every icon, right? And then we're going to probably release it to the entire industry and try to just fix an understanding of, again, if I put you in a car, what do you understand and what do you not understand? And what makes sense and what metaphors are there, what stereotypes are changing, all those things. So this is interesting because we spend a lot of time, we dispatch anthropologists all over the world, and they ride with people for weeks at a time, and we talk through features and experiences and mindsets and relationships and things like that, which has been a great addition, I think, to the industry in the last couple of years. But this is a good example of somebody realizing they have driver's assistance, right? They can lock onto the car in front of them and never crash into it. They can, if they take the car out of the lane, the car can push them back into the lane, right? And as many of you guys might be experiencing, this idea of intervention is pretty strange, right? When the car starts slowing down by itself, or it jiggles and then it pushes you back in and things like that. But we're quickly getting towards crash avoidance, right? I think Volvo by 220 says that none of their cars will crash, right? So people are putting stakes in the ground. But in this particular case, Bjorn in Hamburg would go out on the Autobahn 5-6 times to try to figure out what these features and functions do. He just turns them on, turns them off. He resumes, he cancels, he pluses, he minuses, right? All these different controls. And then he goes to the web, and then he goes to the dealership, and he continuously goes till he gets a comfort level, which, again, to Eric's point, without a manual, how do we do these things and really understand and build this comfort level? So for us, it's a lot about this ecosystem, and not just studying the user, but the vehicle at the center of an ecosystem, of relationships and journeys, and doing that at a global level. So this is just a glance at one of our studies. I forgot to ask, how many people actually have cars in the audience? I never know, but it's always a majority. Okay, 89%. And how many people have a name for their car? Not as many, but a half. Okay, so who raised their hand? What's your car's name? Sylvia, okay, awesome. They usually start with S, at least the ones I hear. So, strange anecdote. But we hear this over and over again, right? It's an extra limb. It is my best friend. It's an extension of my day. It's, it's a reflection of me, those kind of things, right? If you remind me to show a video at the end of last week's Detroit Auto Show, we released a new race car and a new Mustang and a Raptor big truck, and it was all about horsepower and being unstoppable, right, in this world of autonomy, but it's still very much a reflection of who the people are that want to buy these things. So again, just at a glance, I've got lots of content coming in, I've got unlimited functionality, and I've got to filter through all of these things. The other element to it, when I said we're a software company, we're a data analytics company, we also abide by regulations. So we also have a stick, right? And that stick is North American Highway Transportation Safety Association, NHTSA. And multiple countries have multiple organizations like this with rules. The rules deal with glance time. So how many times can I take my eyes off the road to do something, to function, right? And for what duration? And these are getting more and more stringent. So if you look at the tail end on the right side, what also has become interesting is now the average lifetime of ownership for a vehicle is 11 years. And you want to keep that fresh. So as Tesla's kind of shown us, and Nest has shown us, and others, we can continuously upgrade the product, right, based on human learnings, patterns of behavior, things that people might want, just for a weekend, those kind of things. So a lot of what we do is around the hypothesis and ideation. Lucky for me, it is user-driven design, right? It's very participatory, co-discovery type stuff. We have lots of labs. We do quantitative, qualitative research, and so forth. But these are just a few of the issues. I mean, interaction paradigms, information architectures, the nomenclature itself, categorization, customization. And then we talk about brought-in, beamed-in, and built-in functionality. So now I can build it into the car, like embedded maps, or I can plug in my phone and get maps, or I can beam it in, right? One thing we continuously do, to the point of the organizational buy-in, is write a lot of tenets and UX principles. So again, it's about simplicity. I'm dealing with maybe 400 feature owners in the company, right? And each one has a roadmap, and each one has goals and objectives around their feature. In some cases, those features might not even belong in a vehicle. So how do I kind of use my rules and regulations and good practices? Sorry, we're getting cropped there, but prioritizing monitoring over actions, create driving optimized interaction, building on paradigms that work. This one's really critical. So Eric, I think, mentioned kind of what's familiar. So the stereotypes of if I sit you in a blank car and I ask you to adjust your seats, you're usually going to reach down looking for something. If I ask you to adjust the temperature, you're probably going to reach over here and look for a knob. But as everything goes to the glass, where do you look? If I ask you to play music, you used to look for a button. Now you look to the screen, right? So a stereotype has changed. Those kind of things are critical for us just to really understand, the change in patterns of behavior. And then there's human tendency. And this is a measure of the degrees of distraction. So when you talk or listen to somebody else while you're driving, or you're having interaction with a passenger, you're actually more attentive driving than if you weren't doing those things. But as soon as you start to adjust instrument panels, put on your makeup, eat a cheeseburger, read the paper, and do these things, you start to get more and more distracted. So if you see the line there, it's 0 through 5. If you go out to 23, that's where texting is. So texting is probably the single most dangerous thing you can do, right, in your vehicle. We run studies where we'll say to a 16-year-old who sends 4,000 text messages a day, we'll say, we're going to put your phone on the passenger seat, and I want you to drive 5 miles, and if you can do that, I'll give you $250 without sending a text. They cannot do it, right? They think they do it, but they don't realize they didn't do it, or that they actually texted, right? It is an extension of how they communicate and live and breathe, and it's very habitual, and it's unconscious. So how do you deal with that, right? How do you regulate these things? How do you control this? And human behavior is what it is, and how am I going to accommodate this, right? These addictions or these changes. This is an interesting one and definitely challenging. And do you have people tethered? Do you put it away? Those kind of things. So all in all, just looking at the interior of the vehicle, these are most of the topics that we deal with. The interesting piece now is when you start to warn somebody and then you intervene and then you take over the car, what's that dialogue? When you recognize whether it's a husband or wife driving the same car, you have personal profiles and preferences. And then there's just the stock usability, right? To all of us in this room, I think good usability is the cost of entry, right? Recall, recognition, error rates. We know how to do that pretty well. So, but this domain still needs work there, just around clarity of features and everything else. And then to Eric's point, not a lot of this is new. It's been the same kind of iterations and technology applications and investigations. This is from, I think, the late 50s. But what is new is learning and supporting and the refresh over time as well. So So basically just bringing in a process of what I'll call the 4Ds, and I've used this, I think, in most industries, as you guys have as well, just around understanding the quantitative and qualitative inputs, the wants and needs, the behaviors, bringing the empathy and the understanding of consumers, right? And then formulating hypotheses and structures and frameworks and matrices of how things are going to work and relate to each other, and then getting into the design itself. And then the design has a lot of inputs. And then we actually do the specifications. We do the interactive modeling. The modeling's in a code base that goes right into the car and so forth. So at some point, you own every pixel, you own every function, and try to convert that. We also have no loss of critiques, analysis, from consumer reports to JD Power to third-party evaluations to an endless stream of even internal teams that drive vehicles, drive prototypes, and test everything. So what's interesting, too, beyond those inputs, I think we just announced a new software platform in the vehicle and a new touchscreen called Sync 3. We announced that about a month ago. But we had 22,000, bits of consumer input just to as feedback to influence the design. That combined with the consumer understanding, combined with design and trends, kind of looks for what's this future brand experience going to be, and what's our design language going to be within the car and through the dialogue with the vehicle. Any fashion-forward jumpsuits here? No. But, I think looking at what's coming and what may seem goofy now and may seem strange and unusual, in the form of materials, in the mixing and blending of materials. This is wood used in sculpture. In the blend, again, like what's capturing people's interest, what's familiar, what's simple and clean, again, right? Whether it's in packaging of pills and so forth is important. I talk a lot about, the good grips, designing for the elderly, designing for accessibility, and how that really can even flow into mainstream products in such an easy, simplified, actually perceived valuable way. So, whether it's products. Architecture is interesting, too, because inside the vehicle now has become one of the only places where people interact with each other. So if you think about your home and your Wi-Fi networks and screens in every room and a fragmented family, or school might be like that, work might be like that. You're isolated a lot, but sometimes, we know the frequency of which multiple people are in the car and they actually interact. So the question becomes, is 4G good in a car, right? Do you want unlimited bandwidth? Or does the mom want to, turn off all the networks and just have a conversation with the kid who's 2 feet away, right? And if you're like me, I've got 2 sons, and I used my drives, within 5 miles, 3 miles, or less, just to catch up with my kids. What'd you do today? What's new in your world? Those kind of things, because it might be one of those only times we're interacting. Lots of other influences, from fonts to modular systems to colors, materials, and finishes, and how that's applied, and so forth. Our job is to basically forecast where that's going. What's interesting to me is I still think there's an old technological aesthetic that exists throughout the industry at large. And then again, no instruction manual. The biggest influence today is definitely the mobile devices and tablets and flat versus intentional dimension and Google material and those kind of things and the influence they have. The bigger ones for me are still these kind of classic and timeless combinations of shapes and form and graphics and so forth. With our latest software platform, we wound up with something like this, where we were looking at simple lighting, a little bit of dimensionality, different accent colors, and again, something that blends within the entire range of vehicles and can be plugged right into all Fords in this case. Eric mentioned understanding what's working and not messing with it. So one challenge within the industry is this constant desire to improve everything, right? Especially when we know there's no complaints, there's a strong understanding of what's working just fine. So within my team, there's actual things we just refuse to, they're forbidden from touching at this point because there's so many other issues to tackle. The other part of our company is building sensors. So between cameras, 35 or 38 sensors around the vehicle itself, detecting what's happening in the car in the near future, right? detecting how you're driving, whether you're drowsy, and then detecting, the 360 view close by, and then maybe even detecting between you and your journey what's happening, right, and feeding that information to you. I talk a lot about a density of awareness. There's the awareness of what's in your car, what's outside your car, and then what's between you and where you're going. And then the technology just keeps coming, right? So in the future, you could imagine heads-up displays and everything's going through your windshield. And your headlights might be projecting in certain ways, or things may be projected onto your windshield itself. And you've got this world of metadata and functionality kind of coming at you. And then you've got multiple displays and buttons and functions, and how do you control all that? Or do you just put it on autopilot and let it go and spin your seat around and have a conversation? So. What's interesting again, and prototype. I'm definitely a maker, and I want to bring that to all of my teams around, low fidelity prototyping to building prototypes in vehicles and racing them on closed courses, and everything in between. One of the biggest challenges for us is in this world of extreme function and content, how do you distribute it? How do you make people understand it? What's the logical relationships of what goes down here, or what goes on your steering wheel, what goes over here, what's in this display, and so forth, right? And then to harmonize everything. So multiple screens, even behind the steering wheel. These are some of the latest in the F-150 and others. And then working on, what's becoming a bigger and bigger center screen. In this case, we just redesigned an 8-inch center screen. And you examine, as you do with websites or kiosks or tablets or anything else, what's the interaction paradigm? What are the metaphors? What are the behaviors of the UI itself? And in this case, we went from resistive to capacitive. So what does capacitive afford you, right? We're all used to swiping and pinching and zooming and those kind of things. What's interesting with our products is people with long fingernails. People that are missing fingers, that are driving, using touchscreens. My favorite is truck drivers wearing gloves most of the time. So how do you accommodate that? But my favorite is kind of contractors with calluses that can't even make a touchscreen work. So they lick their fingers before they touch everything, right? So imagine that world, and these are the real world kind of test scenarios that we see all the time. So, here we are just getting into concepts around. One thing that's been interesting is daytime and nighttime. So using the sensors to realize a certain glare on the car and changing the luminosity of the screen to be more readable while you're driving. That's kind of an interesting outcome of what's coming. Information density, layout, do we bring new dimensions and screens and shapes and sizes and behaviors? What's interesting is people also self-regulate themselves, and they realize what they should and shouldn't be doing. They realize that it shouldn't be like their iPad in the car, right? But exactly, again, what should it be? So we spend an inordinate amount of time talking to Gus, Gus the cat. Or in this case, building medium to low fidelity prototypes, testing them in simulators, and really understanding, again, what are some of these stereotypes and do they work or not work? Are they recognized and so forth, right? This is a big one, I think. Everybody moves towards home screens and panels and, blocking things, but I leave navigation on all the time. And I want to turn my car off and have navigation back on when I turn my car on, or music in most cases. And then there's this, right? And this is where the industry is today. It's not distilling web content and structured data and making sense of it, but it will soon. But right now, we're just integrating all the apps, and building infrastructures and SDKs and opening APIs and experimenting and so forth. It's really interesting when you can track people's windshield wiper speed and understand macro weather, in an entire city, and these little tiny kind of findings. Applying a look and feel, looking at dimensionality, transparency, what works, what doesn't. Is it flat? Is it dimensional? Daytime, nighttime? And then just even storyboarding and communicating all the different functions. And then tracking and seeing how people's behaviors are changing. So rear cameras are going to be a mandate starting, I think, this year in all new cars. And what's interesting is people stop looking around, right? They stop looking back before they drive. And they kind of feel diminished in their ability to drive when these different images are around them, and this kind of aided awareness is around them. And then there's mobility, right? So an amazing amount of possible business models, sharing vehicles, multiple people purchasing a vehicle together, and then even service-based revenue through the vehicle, right? And this is something in my career that I've seen over and over again, whether it was IBM or Motorola or Google, is this realized opportunity of service-based revenue and service design. The challenge is, again, the artifacts that we create, the way we talk about it. Most of what we're doing these days is narrative and storyboarding and reflecting real-world behaviors into products and services that could be. In this case, Ford, has announced an experiment of being able to hail a bus just to come get you and transport you, which is, and an app. And we're running, I think at CES we announced 25 different experiments around the world around parking assistance and shared vehicles and being able to co-buy things together and so forth. In this case, you're getting off your Hyperloop, you're going to almost like a giant car Pez dispenser, and you're ordering your car for the day and deciding which one you want. So again, the consumer feedback, the prototyping, iterative prototyping, again, from low fidelity to high fidelity. In this case, we've got paper prototypes. We're getting out the 3D modelers and printing, or 3D printers and printing different widgets and buttons and looking at configurations. And we're talking to Gus. And then also, I think there's a value to the digital versions of all of these things. We have labs where we can actually, put you in the virtual vehicle, which is happening in the bottom center there. This is a view of some of our labs. I manage labs in 5 continents, and then actually when we design a new steering wheel or we design a new interior cockpit, we actually validate everything across all of those labs in all these different countries and group sets. The one in the upper left is interesting because it's actually a full vehicle on a multi-axis simulator that is very close to driving. But again, what are the primary things that people do in their cars? They still want to listen to music. They want to get from point A to point B, and they want to make phone calls, right? And everything else is coming, and the question is, what will we do and not do? I'm going to cue a video here, if I can, just to show you some of what our test facilities look like and what we can see. In this case, again, running a range of 16-year-olds to 86-year-olds that drive. In this case, she's looking for settings, and settings, and adjusting settings while driving. And the settings is in the upper right corner. You can't really, the screen's in the lower left, but it's hiding in plain sight, right? This always happens, where, just the simplicity of what we think is an industry norm or something like that, and folks kind of struggle with it. So we spend hours and hours with these types of simulations. This is Anne. So again, what's important, right? We see things as we are, not as they actually are in the context that we have. In this case, Anne was really about bigger buttons, wordings, and icons, and recognizing in that and saying, okay, I'm trying to drive a car here. The other piece of the research, though, is building closed tracks, putting people in cars, building the prototypes, which is quite difficult, and then even giving these prototype cars to individuals for a month at a time and recording their feedback, journaling with them, doing video observation, ride-alongs, and those kind of things. So, and then, of course, comparing to the competition and making sure we're always kind of setting a new benchmark. In this case, primary traits of measurement, I still value the aesthetic as being significantly important, particularly in the exterior of the vehicle. If the exterior isn't compelling, you're not going to get somebody even into the interior to consider the vehicle itself. And a lot of times, when you're shopping for a car, you'll see people open the door and they won't even get in, they'll just walk away. And that they're making a read, right, of what the vehicle has and what it can do and how well it fits them. I mentioned some of the lighting labs. So this is an example of one of the labs where we actually can simulate any time of day, anywhere in the world. So in any kind of lighting condition, whether it's foggy in London or desert sunlight at noon and kind of look at the readability and adjust screens and so forth. And we look at every detail of the buttons and the labels and the screen elements, and we look at what passes and fails, different contrast ratios and different lighting scenarios. This is where we ended up. And then as we go, what's critical is just a holistic experience of all the buttons and the systems together working, whether they're working in daytime or nighttime. And in this case, we're actually just dropping comps into the vehicles themselves and seeing how they relate to, this is an Explorer. And then the specifications. I think bringing a significant rigor around graphic patterns, UI patterns, design standards, guidelines, and the rules. The rules are not always right, but we have a very strong opinion, right? The team has to establish the do's and don'ts and to aid in decision making. Because what is interesting and just around data and data analytics, and I think Tony Fadell sums this up the best, is about being a design-informed company or a data-informed company. Because even though you have all the data in the world, like they have updated Nest 15 times, and they know every twist and turn, and that's still just an input to the decisions that all of us have to make, right, around having an opinion of what comes next and documenting that to the company and prototyping that and so forth. Also important, I think, is to create the vision of what you want the outcome to be. So for many companies now, I think you hear about them creating the advertising campaign or creating billboards and marketing collateral before the project even starts. So that has always been a good exercise for us. And then the future, obviously, is around kind of mapping the world and going from semi-autonomous to autonomous. So in this world where the vehicle is tracking every inch and is mapping everything around it, and at some point I think we'll have a footprint of a global map, what does the vehicle become? Does it become your new living room? Does it become your new productive office? Does it become your new island in your kitchen where everybody socializes? And our research is indicating that it's going to be all of those things. So the design is going to change significantly, I think. It's really interesting because in one day I can be in a car with a participant and an owner of a truck where they spend 10 hours a day in their truck. And they're completely productive, and it's their mobile office. And then I can get in another car, and it's somebody that's driven for 12 years, and they've only driven 23.3 miles per day, and they've only ever listened to one radio station, and they've never had a passenger in the car, right? So the extremes. And then the next person that I'll talk to actually eats every meal in their car, has 5 blankets, and is growing some plants, in the car as well. And we see this stuff all the time, and it's great because to me, it's kind of unbridled and it's limitless, and you just have to really track the understanding of where things are going and so forth. So that's my story. I will try to show just this one video to close of our announcements from last week around what's still, I think, important to folks and where the auto industry is around supercars. So this is the other end of it, of actually working with race drivers and understanding performance aspects and, kind of spending 6 months to develop a very fast car. test vehicles. Questions? Where else can you go from accessibility to supercars other than a UX conference? So, yes?
Do you get any ideas from science fiction? Like, I sometimes things we've seen in Blade Runner or
Yeah.
where that Sylvester Stallone's a future cop and he gets in his car and he just takes him to work. He didn't have to do anything.
Sure. And I think I look to Hollywood first sometimes, right? It's interesting, though, things like Minority Report, 2003, 2004, everybody thinks gestures are coming and we're going to take me home or raise the volume or, go to the next destination. It's not going to happen, right? Again, these learnings from the past of mobile and web space, I think there's a lot to take forward. I think what's interesting about this video is it real or is it a video game, right? And what we hear a lot from people is I'm in this cocoon and the world is just passing me by and I see it all through my windshield and pretty soon the windshield's going to enhance the world around you, whether it has addresses or it highlights, pedestrians and all those kind of things. And it really does blur between, it's more real than real and it's more interesting than real, and that's definitely something. And then if you start adding glass, so when you think about 14-inch screens and high resolution and super AMOLED 3D graphics and heads-up displays, it feels like you're driving a video game, right? And those are things we have to keep in mind and constrain and balance and really understand, right?
Yeah. How do you see this evolving content strategy? I mean, the actual, over here. Sorry, over here.
Okay,
Turn,
sorry.
There.
Mystery
there we
person.
Go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mouthwash.
How do you see all this change in UX starting to drive content strategy? Are we still going to organize our content like publishing or like a video game?
Yeah, good question. I think, without a doubt, just even the organizational structures, the nomenclature, categorization, those kind of things are critical. And mapping to mental models and having people to be able to learn and recall and recognize things over time and be familiar with it is a challenge, especially when we start bringing all these adaptive, inferential type experiences into the vehicle. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm hoping for actually a significant simplification, right, and new metaphors that kind of capture these things. So maybe it really is just 3 levels of autonomy instead of turning all the buttons and locking on and lane keep assist and those kind of things. So that is what we work on is, where should we evolve it and how do we kind of wrangle all this complexity in a simplified way. I guess it depends what video games you play or what publishing you read. It could go in either direction. But I think it's interesting to me, too, having through my career, done computers and consumer electronics and telecom and now the automotive space, it is a logical progression. And the same issues have always existed in each of them, and just the technology's kind of caught up, right? You hook to the cloud, you get the bandwidth and the feeds. But in this case, you've got passengers, and again, you're driving, right? And safety's the other issue. So to me, that was the big challenge. Good question. Yes? I'll repeat it after you say it, if you don't mind.
I was really fascinated to see you applying the 4D process.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and I'm wondering how much in the discovery phase does your user research influence design or real practical application to what you're doing?
Sure. So hopefully everybody heard that, but it was more around, again, lots of folks know the 4D process. How much does discovery really influence everything we do? There's almost an endless amount of research, right? We have entire marketing teams. We have ethnographic teams. We have ergonomic teams. We have online teams and so forth. I think for a UX manager, it's the beauty's in the synthesis, right? And identifying where the gaps are. So what questions do we need answering, right? To the point of innovation that Eric had earlier, what problems are you trying to solve? And amongst everything that we have all the time, we get it from third-party analysts, we get it from this NHTSA governing body, right? We get it from universities that run studies all the time, and we collaborate with them. What's missing? And where the really hard part is, and you guys know this, is that synthesis, right? Whether it's affinity diagramming, whether it's doing the math and crunching the numbers and doing factor and regression analysis of databases, but really identifying patterns. So where do the patterns come, and how do we really coalesce that data? It overwhelmingly affects the design at this point, because if I can empirically validate anything, or even if I can qualitatively validate with humans, it's pretty convincing. And for a long time, and when I joined, I heard every day, well, I drive this way. My wife likes this. And these people, they live in Michigan, so they don't matter to me. They live in Detroit, they don't matter to me. They live in Michigan, they don't matter, Again, it's they see the world as they are, and they've been doing this for a long time, and, how do you bring this unbiased, empathic, unopinionated opinion to really have the data influence, but, guide design, I guess. Does that help? Yeah. Did I answer it? Okay. I think, in our traditional world of UX, we think about functions and features and the way we talk about them and that dialogue. And at this point, we can completely control that dialogue especially if it's a reflection of the research and what people say and do and think. So,
all right. Well, let's thank Parrish for this talk. Thank you very much.